We are the most informed generation in human history, but we're also the most anxious, the most medicated, and the most divided. Today we ask the question that hardly anybody wants to answer. What if the information is the problem? Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to this edition of Creating the Future with me, Dr. Brent Simpson, where we dive into stories and truths and deep questions that help us shape our faith, our families, and of course, ultimately our future. Well, I am really excited about the content that we're going to talk about today, and I encourage you to make sure you watch through the whole thing because it's really kind of two parts that we're going to connect together to, I think, solve some big problems, or at least raise awareness for why these big problems are present. And so I want to start out today with some numbers, but I think these numbers are relatively common today, but I want us to just own and understand how significant this is. And for instance, the American Psychological Association reports that anxiety disorders are now the most common health condition in the United States, affecting roughly about 40 million adults. That's about 18% of the population, and they are drastically rising. In fact, from 2008 to 2018, and that's been almost a decade ago, it's gone up by 50%, and you see these stress levels just shooting up all over the place, anxiety levels going up all over the place in every demographic across all of America, and really to some degree all around the world. Perhaps what's most striking is that this increase of anxiety and depression and mental disorders correlate precisely with the widespread adoption of smartphones all over the world and all over America, beginning in around 2012. And right about that time, you can see that these anxiety levels start absolutely peaking. And what is this all about? See, here's what I want you to see. This is not just like personal weakness. This is not a generation that just simply can't handle difficulty necessarily. There is a measurable, documented, data-supported epidemic that's going on, and it's coming from a place that you might not be thinking about. You see, something has changed, and I think most of us, if we're honest, sort of already know what it is. And what am I talking about? Well, let's go back a few generations, and I want to think about your great-great-grandparents for a moment. They lived hard lives by virtually any measure that we're looking at. They didn't have any modern medicine. They had no climate control. I mean, my great-great-grandparents were living in Florida already, at least on my dad's side, and they had no air condition in Florida with the heat and the humidity and the mosquitoes and the swamps, and that's where they were living. And physical labor in that time period for virtually everybody was sun up to sundown, and real proximity to death was around us at all times. I mean, it was always something that could be experienced. People were dying all the time. And yet there is something that they had that we've basically almost entirely lost. You see, they didn't even know what was happening in the next county oftentimes, let alone what's happening in the next continent. If a famine broke out in India, they didn't know. If a war erupted in Eastern Europe, they wouldn't know about it for weeks sometimes. And even if they heard about it, it's coming in some little newspaper column that's like a micro version of what's even going on. If a political scandals unfolding in the Capitol, it arrived, but it arrived slowly, and it's filtered through editors and distance and time. And by the time it gets to our ancestors, it's already gone on for quite a bit of time. You see, their nervous systems were calibrated to a village. Hear that. Let me say it again to you. Their nervous systems, the way God designed them, was calibrated to a village, not a continent, not a globe. And the world they experienced, by and large, all their minds had to process was really just the size of their little community, their village, so to speak. And that's not ignorance, by the way. That's scale. Human beings were designed for a certain scale of awareness. We were built to know our neighbors, to understand our immediate community, to respond to threats and opportunities within walking distance, to deal with what's in front of us. But we weren't designed with the cognitive and emotional bandwidth to go beyond that and start dealing with things globally and things happening all over the world. And for most of human history, it was enough just to know what was going on right there around us. But nowadays, everything is shifting. Now we wake up and before we've had our very first cup of coffee, we've been exposed to mass shootings and political crisis and natural disasters and wars and economic collapse and a viral outrage and 17 different people's opinions on what that viral outrage is, right? And from people that oftentimes we've never even met and very rarely even really know that well, and people that are talking about places that we're never even going to go and involving people that we'll never even know. And then we're supposed to get up and get out of bed, have our coffee, and just go on about our day as if nothing's happening. You see, our forefathers were not necessarily simply more resistant than we are. They weren't just necessarily just tougher. They were more at peace because the world that they were around was more humanized. It was different than ours. They weren't hearing what's happening around the world instantly and everybody's opinion on it. And what's happened over the time is that nobody warned us of the size of the world that's now coming into our little worlds and costing us the price of peace, costing us our mental clarity and our mental health, our ability to think straight. And in some cases, it's literally costing us our lives as depression takes over. Now, there's a lot more to depression, and that's probably for a whole nother episode, and there's a lot more to this. But now I want to switch gears and say something that might genuinely surprise you. See, when I talk about mental health and the rise of the cell phone and how that affects it and the rise of information, that might not shock you. But this might shock you. Every time I've said it to people, it always shocks them. By almost every measurable metric, the world is objectively better today than it has been in virtually all of human history. Let that sink in. I know we think the world is going to hell in a handbasket and it's worse now than it was when I was a child, but literally all the data actually shows the opposite. Things like extreme poverty are dropped roughly 90% in the globe from the last couple hundred years. It's less than 10% today. Child mortality has dropped incredibly low compared to what it was through most of human history. Education and literacy has risen at levels that it was not for so long around human history. And life expectancy has literally doubled over the last few hundred years. And deaths from wars, when you're looking at global population, is literally near historic lows, like in the history of the world. Large-scale famine has been basically almost doesn't exist like it once did. There's lots of scholars who have written about this, and two of them are guys by the name of Pinker and Rosling, and they wrote about it in a book, and they started talking about the nature of the Enlightenment and how it affected us and how the facts have affected us and how we've changed. And their conclusion is consistent, and that is that the world is, by the numbers, the best it has ever been for the average human being. Let that sink in. The world is, according to the stats, the data, by the numbers, the world is the best it has ever been for the average human being. So why does it feel like everything is falling apart? Well, Rosling would call this the negativity instinct. That he would say that we are deeply wired to notice the bad things, remember the bad things, more than we celebrate the good things. I mean, you know that's true. Think if somebody comes up and tells you how great they are and 100 people tell you wonderful things about you, but one person says the negative, what's the only thing you can think about for the rest of the day? It's the negative, right? Well, that's what happens within our brains, the way that we are wired. And so we're looking for the negative. We're seeing the negative. Now, what's happening is now there's more cameras pointed at suffering than any other time in human history. So we're seeing the negative. There's platforms with disturbing footage happening all the time. There's voices that are amplifying all of this footage. And then there's algorithms that are literally actively selecting and putting it in front of us because it knows that you'll keep scrolling the more distressing things you see, the more frustrating, difficult, hard, ugly things you see, the more likely you are to stay engaged and actually continue scrolling. And the rate of the terrible events in the world hasn't increased at all. What has increased, listen, is our exposure to them. And here's the simple fact. Our nervous system cannot tell the difference. So you're not more anxious than your great-grandparents because the world is more dangerous. You're more anxious than your great-grandparents because you have a knowledge of the world and what's happening in the world that far exceeds anything that they've experienced. See, this is not just like awareness. This is us drowning in awareness. Now, if you've been with us throughout this philosophy series, you know that we've spent considerable time talking about Socrates and his critique of democracy. His core argument was that a society fails when uninformed voices are given equal weight to informed ones. He used the doctor analogy. He would say, you wouldn't let a crowd vote on who's going to perform your surgery, would you, right? No, you would want to give the best available surgeon the opportunity, not the most popular person who may have no ability for that. We talked about that in the first week. What happens when the least informed voice in the room has the same megaphone as the most informed one, and the platform carrying both of them actively rewards whoever generates the most emotional reaction? Well, now you are in a recipe for anxiety and depression and mental illness. See, social media did not create uninformed opinion. It simply gave uninformed opinion an audience. All of a sudden, anybody could have the microphone, and the audience metrics, it gave it like followers and likes and shares, so that now we can see who's getting the most likes and who's getting the most shares. And if the agreement is all the same, we can get all these people compartmentalized so we all agree the same way. And what's happened is popularity has been masquerading now as wisdom or truth, right? Socrates would recognize this immediately. Like Socrates would see this. This is what he would refer to as the democratic man when he wrote about it in the Republic. The one who does not lead with wisdom, but performs for the crowd. Except now the performance is not in the Athenian assembly. Now the performance is in everybody's pockets, 24 hours a day, optimized to the algorithms to make sure that it's right exactly what you want to hear and in your vein and exactly your group that you run with, and making sure whether it's true or not that you stay in front of it and keep watching it. See, here's the thing. The algorithms, they don't reward accuracy. They reward engagement. And engagement is driven by emotion. Engagement is often driven by outrage and fear and tribalism and moral indignation. And the most emotionally provocative contents often spread the fastest, regardless of whether they're true, right? You know this. And we've built some of the largest distribution systems in human history that are not optimized based on truth. They're optimized based on engagement and reaction. And the result? The average person in 2026 is consuming more information than any human being ever in history. And yet we are less equipped than any other generation to actually evaluate that information through critical thinking and source literacy and intellectual humility and all those things that were taught a generation ago. And now it's not that they're not necessarily taught, but we don't always see them and we don't know how to utilize them. The information is coming at us so incredibly fast. We don't know how to actually implement those critical thinking needs that we need to have. See, we've given everyone a microphone and we've given almost no wisdom on how to put it down, right? We said, everybody, here's your microphone. But we never told them when to shut up and listen, when to not talk, when to put the microphone down. So, and before we go any further, if this episode is making you think, and if it's like landing somewhere for you, take a moment right now and make sure that you subscribe, make sure that you like, make sure if you know somebody that you think this conversation will be helpful for, make sure that you share that with them as well. Okay, now let's switch over from the information coming in and the overwhelming nature of that to the second part of this series, or the second part of this teaching that I want to do and connect the dots in a way that you might not have always seen. And that has to do with trust, right? And the deepest problem we face in America right now, in my opinion, deeper than any single political issue, deeper than any particular piece of misinformation, deeper than just the overwhelming amount of information, deeper than any one bad actor or anyone on a platform that's doing things wrong. It's this. See, civilizations aren't built on armies. They're not built on economies. They're not even built on law. Civilizations at their very root are built on trust. Trust that the information you receive is at least roughly accurate. Trust that the institutions around you are operating in good faith and doing things right. Trust that people you share society with are working from the same basic set of facts. When that trust begins to disintegrate, when it begins to fall apart, now we are in for a mess, because our values, our future, our ability to work together is all built on whether I can trust you. And when that trust collapses, everything built on top of it begins to collapse as well. Or at the very minimum, it begins to become unstable, right? Trust is so very important, and societies are built on trust. And misinformation is not just a problem of false facts. As destructive as that is, misinformation spreads far more dangerous things than just false facts. It spreads mistrust. It spreads the ability not to know for certain what is true and what's not true, and not knowing if I can trust this person or trust that institution. Maybe that institution is corrupt, and now every source has an agenda, and the truth itself is just a matter of perspective. And as Pilate would say to Jesus, what is truth at the end of the day anyway, right? And once enough people believe that, once a critical mass of society decides that reality is negotiable, the foundation falls apart. You simply can't govern each other. We can't have any agreement. We have no trust. You can't solve problems together. We retreat into our tribes. We retreat into those who we agree with, our own little ecosystems, each convincing the other person on our side that we're right and everybody else on the other side is wrong. And maybe not even just wrong, but malicious and evil and trying to destroy everything. And this, my friends, is where we started at. This is the Socrates democracy to tyranny arc, accelerated due to social media and due to the mistrust of misinformation. Division and chaos don't require armies and revolutions anymore. They can be manufactured on a server farm, delivered to 300 million people before we eat breakfast in the morning, right? We live in a whole nother world that's causing misinformation and mistrust and destroying us and really causing tyranny and the arc that Socrates predicted. Now, when people stop trusting each other, when shared reality the civilization depends on begins to fracture, everything begins to fall apart, because the question becomes, who speaks with authority? Who cuts through the noise? Who can I trust to actually tell the truth? How can I know what is real? I just sat with a bunch of young adults recently, and we were discussing future sermon series, and that's one of the things that come up is like, how do we know what is real? Everybody's throwing information at us. And that's where we want to begin to look at this a little bit differently today, because our forefathers didn't have to deal with this the same way that we're having to deal with this. We no longer have the ability to know what is true. So what do we do with all of this? How does this come home for you and I? So I want to end with being honest with you that the answer is not simply to log off, move into a log cabin somewhere and pretend that the world doesn't exist and pretend that all of this is not going on, right? That's not wisdom, that's avoidance, right? But avoidance has never built anything worth keeping, so let's not be people of avoidance. We're not just going to be monks that go out in the desert and hide from the world. Instead, the Christian tradition offers something that neither Socrates nor Nietzsche nor any of those other philosophers could provide, and something that's more urgently needed right now than almost at any other time in human history. Well, let's go back to say it this way. Proverbs 4 verse 7 would say, the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, and whatever you get, gain insight. Get insight. The biblical tradition has never been afraid of clear seeing. It's never had an issue with truth. In fact, it's always called people to clarity, even when clarity is uncomfortable. It's honestly, even especially when clarity is uncomfortable. Jesus would look and speak truth no matter what was happening within society, no matter how many people were against him. He would look at broken, noisy, manipulated people in this world, and he did not flinch as he called them out. He named religious performers. He called them whitewashed tombs. He called the crowd's manipulation exactly what it was. And he didn't soften the diagnosis to protect people's feelings. He saw clearly. He spoke clearly. He lived with a groundedness that the noise around him could not touch. And here is why. He was not grounded in the news cycle. He was not grounded in public opinion. He was not grounded in what the crowd believed about him on any given Tuesday. He was not grounded in any of those things. He was grounding in something that an algorithm cannot reach and misinformation cannot erode. He was grounded in the truth of the Word of God and the experience of his relationship with Father God. He was grounded in his identity as a child of God. John 8, he would say, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That freedom is not ignorance. It's not going back to some comfortable place. It's not pretending that the strings don't exist. It's the ability to see clearly, to see the world through a biblical lens, the ability to see that I don't have to have all the information. I just have to know the truth of the Word of God, the ability to have my identity grounded in who God says I am, that gives me a peace and a comfort. And as Paul would say to the Philippian church, a peace that passes all understanding. And then you can start to know what is really real all around you. See, your forefathers had peace not because they were ignorant, but because they were in a world that was human-sized, so to speak. You can recover something of that peace yourself by shrinking the world, not just all the news of going on, but shrinking the world and deciding, deliberately deciding, intentionally deciding that you are going to allow the things in your mind that are of God and informed by God and His world, choosing depth over volume, choosing truth over all the misinformation, choosing to actually follow those who have wisdom instead of those who just have the biggest platform. By choosing verified over viral, choosing the still small voice that's speaking into your heart, not just choosing to listen to social media. I want to close out this little series we've done on philosophy with a charge to you, the same way I've actually done every single part of this series. And I would like to say this to you. In a world where everybody has a platform, be somebody worth listening to. Not because you have the most followers, not because the algorithm loves you, but because you've done the work. You've done the reading, the thinking, the questioning, the sitting with the hard things long enough to actually understand them. Be the one who's not just reacting all the time. Refuse to share what you have not verified. Refuse to be moved out of outrage alone. Refuse to mistake volume for wisdom or large following for expertise. Refuse to let your picture of the world be painted entirely by a platform that profits from your anxiety. And in moments when the noise becomes overwhelming, when the anxiety is coming, when you feel like you are drowning in information and starving for truth, remember that your life is not built on the comfort of the crowd. You were built on truth and for the truth of the Word of God. Truth is not fragile. It does not need you to protect it. It does not need any of those things. It simply needs you to pursue it honestly and humbly, courageously, even when the crowd is moving in another direction, and especially sometimes when the crowd is moving in another direction. See clearly, stand firmly, and I charge you to be a person who is standing on truth that is more durable than any noise that anyone could throw at it. So as we wrap up this philosophy series, I have genuinely loved every single episode. I love talking philosophy. And we started with Socrates and the question about democracy. And we moved through history's truth tellers who were silenced for asking the right things at the wrong rooms and asking those questions. And we landed here in 2026 in America, drowning in information while we are starving for wisdom. And I hope these episodes did something useful to you, not just so you can fill your heads with ideas, not just so I can spark something there, but hopefully so that we can sharpen the way that you see the world so that we can better understand it. And I think that's what philosophy ultimately does, and that's what Jesus ultimately does, is give you a new understanding of truth that shifts everything. Now, next week, we will move on to a whole nother topic and we will go on from there. But I hope this whole series has been beneficial to you. I hope you've enjoyed this today. And if you have, make sure that you like, subscribe, share. Make sure you give us a rating if you're in a place where you can give us a rating. And I really look forward to seeing you back next week. And as always, the future isn't something that happens to you. It's something that you get the opportunity to help create.